I sat motionless in the cold leather chair of a high-end law office, holding a rusty tractor key, while my younger sister loudly celebrated inheriting a $15 million family business. She laughed right in my face and told me I should have scrubbed our dying grandfather's bedpans a little better if I wanted a real cut of the money. Her husband smirked and joked that my cheap accounting degree was finally going to pay off with a manual labor job on a dirt farm. But as they popped champagne in the parking lot to toast their new wealth, they had absolutely no idea that the rundown farmhouse I was just given held a secret that would legally bankrupt their entire empire in a matter of weeks. The heavy mahogany doors of Mr. Caldwell's office felt suffocating as they closed behind us. The reading of a will was supposed to be a solemn occasion. It was supposed to be a time to honor the man who built Harrison Logistics from a single delivery truck into a statewide corporate powerhouse in Texas. Instead, the room sounded like a victory party for my sister Brittany. I had spent the last 6 months of my grandfather's life sleeping on an uncomfortable plastic cot next to his hospice bed. I fed him ice chips, administered his pain medication, and held his calloused hand while he slowly faded away. During all those agonizing months, Brittany visited exactly twice. Both times she complained about the hospital smell and asked our grandfather for an advance on her inheritance to fund a luxury vacation to Cabo. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. He looked down at the thick legal document on his desk, his expression unreadable. He announced that Brittany was receiving 100% of the shares in Harrison Logistics, granting her full ownership and the title of Chief Executive Officer. The company had a stated book value of $15 million. Brittany gasped in mock surprise, immediately clapping her hands together. She turned to her husband, Dion. Dion is a 34-year-old African-American man who always wears impeccably tailored suits and expensive luxury watches. He calls himself a strategy executive, though nobody in the family could ever figure out what actual work he did. Dion pumped his fist and pulled Brittany into a tight hug, kissing her cheek loudly. Then Mr. Caldwell turned to me. He pushed a thin, single-page document across the polished oak desk. It was the deed to our grandfather's old property on the outskirts of Austin. It was universally known in the family as the rundown farmhouse, a property that had not been actively lived in or maintained for nearly a decade. Brittany let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed off the wood-paneled walls. She reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a rusted iron key attached to a faded yellow tag, and tossed it across the table. It clattered loudly against the wood and slid to a stop right in front of my hands. "Take good care of the dirt, Stella." Brittany sneered, her perfectly manicured nails tapping against the armrest of her chair. "Honestly, if you wanted a piece of the real money, you should have taken better care of him at the end. Maybe if you smiled more instead of looking so miserable all the time, he would have left you a truck or something." Dion chuckled, leaning back in his chair with his hands behind his head. "Look on the bright side, Stella," Dion said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You always brag about being so smart with numbers. Now your cheap accounting degree is finally going to pay off. You can count the weeds in your new front yard." I did not react. I simply picked up the rusty key and wrapped my fingers around it. "My name is Stella. I am 33 years old and I work as a forensic accountant. I am the woman who was always expected to carry the heavy burdens for my family, while my younger sister received all the praise and the rewards. Have you ever been the family scapegoat who was forced to give everything and get absolutely nothing in return? Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to my channel to see exactly how a supposedly worthless dirt farm destroyed a multi-million-dollar corporate illusion. The meeting ended, and we all walked out of the air-conditioned building into the blazing Texas heat. I walked slowly, clutching the deed to the farmhouse in my hand. I expected at least a small word of comfort from my mother, Patricia, who had been waiting in the lobby during the entire reading. Instead, the moment we stepped into the parking lot, my mother rushed right past me. She threw her arms wide and wrapped Brittany and Dion in a massive, tearful embrace. She was practically vibrating with excitement, completely ignoring the fact that I was standing right behind them. "Oh, my beautiful girl," Patricia gushed, stroking Brittany's hair. "I knew he would do the right thing. I just knew it. You are going to be the most incredible chief executive officer this state has ever seen. We need to celebrate right now. We are going to that new steakhouse downtown tonight, and it is entirely my treat." I stood a few feet away, completely invisible to the woman who gave birth to me. I cleared my throat softly, forcing her to finally acknowledge my presence. Patricia turned her head to look at me, and her warm smile instantly dropped into a thin, tight line of pure disapproval. "Do not give me that sour look," Stella, my mother, snapped before I could even say a single word. "You have absolutely no right to be jealous today. This is exactly how things should be. You are just a number cruncher. You have always been so plain and painfully single. What would you even do with a massive logistics corporation? You would run it straight into the ground with your boring, cautious attitude. Brittany has the vision. She has the beautiful lifestyle and the social connections to maintain this empire. And Dion is a highly successful strategy executive. He knows how to scale a business and network with high net worth individuals. You should be grateful your grandfather left you anything at all. A dusty old farmhouse is perfect for you. You can hide away out there and not bother anyone with your depressing moods." Her words were designed to cause maximum damage, but they only bounced off the thick emotional armor I had built over 33 years. Growing up, our house was a dedicated shrine to Brittany. Her cheerleading trophies, her pageant crowns, and her expensive designer clothes dominated every single room. I was always the invisible workhorse. When I was 18 years old, I was forced to give up my college savings fund so Brittany could attend a prestigious private university, which she eventually dropped out of after 2 semesters. I worked 2 jobs waiting tables and balancing ledgers to put myself through a state college just to get my accounting degree. I was always the one called upon to fix the family messes, pay the emergency utility bills, and ultimately care for our dying grandfather. And now my mother was standing in a parking lot, justifying the ultimate theft of my time, my love, and my inheritance. I simply looked at my mother, gave a short nod, and turned my back on them. I did not shed a single tear. I started walking toward my practical 5-year-old sedan, leaving them to their arrogant and loud celebration. But before I could unlock my car doors, I heard footsteps hurrying across the hot asphalt behind me. It was Mr. Caldwell. The elderly lawyer looked over his shoulder to make sure my family was completely distracted by Dion, who was now loudly showing off pictures of the new corporate luxury vehicles he planned to buy with company funds. Mr. Caldwell stopped beside my car and quickly reached into his worn leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope sealed with red security tape and stamped with the word "Confidential" in bold black letters. He slid it quietly into my hands, his expression intensely serious. "Your grandfather gave me very strict instructions regarding this package," Mr. Caldwell said softly, his eyes locking onto mine. "He told me to give this to you, and only you, after the dust settled, and your sister showed her true colors at the reading. He always knew you were the smart one, Stella. He knew you were the only one who truly loved him without wanting anything in return. Take this straight to the farmhouse. Open it when you are completely alone and secure. You are a forensic accountant. He said you would know exactly what to do with the numbers hidden inside." I looked down at the heavy envelope resting in my hands. The thick stack of papers inside felt incredibly weighty, like a loaded weapon just waiting to be fired. I looked back across the parking lot one last time. Brittany was laughing loudly, tossing her perfect blonde hair over her shoulder, while Dion kissed her neck, and my mother beamed with pride. They thought they had won the ultimate prize. They thought they had completely crushed me into the dirt and taken everything of value. I unlocked my car door, tossed the confidential envelope onto the passenger seat, and gripped the steering wheel tightly. I was going to the farmhouse, and I was going to use whatever was inside that envelope to tear their fake, arrogant empire down to the very studs. I drove my car straight from the lawyer's office back to the luxury downtown apartment I shared with my family. I pulled into the underground parking garage and slowly took the elevator up to the 14th floor. The moment the silver elevator doors slid open, I froze. My entire life was sitting out in the brightly lit public hallway. Cardboard boxes were stacked haphazardly against the designer wallpaper. My heavy winter coats were thrown carelessly over a pile of my professional work shoes. And standing right in the middle of my scattered belongings was Dion. He was tossing my expensive law and accounting textbooks into a cheap plastic garbage bag. Dion was wearing a custom-tailored navy blue suit that I knew for a fact he had put on a high-interest credit card. He looked up when he heard my footsteps on the hardwood floor. He did not look guilty or embarrassed. Instead, he flashed a massive, arrogant smile. "You are home just in time," Stella Dion announced loudly, tossing another heavy textbook into the trash bag. "We are doing a little corporate restructuring at the moment. I hope you do not mind, but I took the liberty of packing your room for you. Time is money, and as the new co-chief executive officer of Harrison Logistics, my time is incredibly valuable right now." I stared at him, my heart beating with a slow and steady rhythm. I did not raise my voice. I asked him what exactly he thought he was doing with my personal property. Dion let out a deep, booming laugh that echoed down the quiet hallway. "It is very simple, Stella," he said, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "A man in my position needs a dedicated home office to strategize and hold virtual meetings with international clients. Plus, my luxury sneaker collection is expanding rapidly. Your old bedroom is going to make the perfect walk-in sneaker closet and executive lounge. You are moving out to a dirt farm anyway, so you really do not need city accommodations anymore." The front door of the apartment swung open wider. Brittany strolled out into the hallway. She was wearing a silk robe that I had bought for myself last Christmas, holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. She looked at the pile of my belongings with absolute disgust, as if my very existence was cluttering up her perfect aesthetic. "Dion is right, Stella." Brittany sighed, taking a delicate sip from her glass. "You really need to clear this junk out of the hallway before the building management finds us. It is embarrassing to have trash sitting outside our door." I looked directly into my sister's perfectly made-up eyes. I reminded her that my name was the only one on the master lease. I was the one who paid the massive security deposit and the first and last month's rent when we moved into this luxury building 3 years ago. I had allowed them to live in the second bedroom rent-free while Brittany pretended to look for a job, and Dion chased his imaginary business ventures. I told her that if I was leaving, I expected my security deposit transferred back into my bank account immediately. Brittany did not even blink. She just smirked, a cruel and condescending expression that I had seen 1,000 times before. "Oh, about that deposit," she said casually, waving her hand in the air. "I went down to the leasing office this morning right before the will reading. I told them you were vacating the premises and that the lease needed to be transferred solely into my name. They released the deposit, but I went ahead and moved it into my own personal account. Consider it an administrative fee for having to deal with the sudden transition. Besides, you just inherited a whole property out in the country. You do not need the cash. We have a corporate empire to run, and we need the liquidity for immediate operational expenses." She had stolen my security deposit. She had legally manipulated the building management and taken my money to fund her new lifestyle. A normal person would have screamed. But I am a forensic accountant. I do not deal in raw emotional outbursts. I deal in ledgers, liabilities, and cold, hard data. I looked at Brittany. I looked at Dion, who was still admiring his own reflection in the hallway mirror. And suddenly the pieces began to click together in my analytical mind. If they were truly inheriting a highly profitable $15 million logistics empire, they would not be scrambling to steal a few $1,000s from my security deposit to cover operational expenses. True corporate liquidity does not come from a stolen apartment deposit. The absolute desperation behind their extreme arrogance was a massive, glaring red flag. They were acting like billionaires, but their immediate financial actions screamed of a desperate cash flow shortage. I did not shed a single tear. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. I calmly walked past Dion, picked up the plastic bag holding my textbooks, and grabbed the heaviest box of my belongings. "Keep the deposit, Brittany," I said softly, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "You are going to need every single penny of it very soon." I turned my back on them and carried my first box toward the elevator. I could hear Dion laughing behind me, calling me a sore loser. Let them laugh, I thought to myself as the elevator doors closed. They thought they had successfully evicted the family scapegoat. They thought they had secured a luxurious future on my dime. But as I rode the elevator down to my car, my mind was already organizing the financial data points. I was no longer just the marginalized sister. I was an auditor who had just been handed the keys to their destruction. I needed to see what financial ruin they had truly inherited. I merged my car onto the busy interstate highway, leaving the towering glass skyscrapers of downtown Austin far behind me in the rearview mirror. The heavy cardboard boxes containing my entire life rattled slightly in the backseat of my sedan. They were a constant physical reminder of the brutal eviction that had just taken place only minutes earlier. The brutal Texas sun was beginning to set, casting long and dramatic orange shadows across the dry landscape. I drove in complete silence. My mind was already shifting gears, running complex financial models, calculating basic debt-to-income ratios, and deeply analyzing the erratic behavior of my younger sister and my new brother-in-law. I knew with absolute certainty that something was fundamentally wrong with the current state of Harrison Logistics. True corporate wealth simply does not act with such aggressive desperation. Real billionaires do not steal apartment security deposits to cover operational expenses. I was about halfway to the rural outskirts of the city, where my grandfather's farmhouse was located, when my cell phone started ringing loudly through the car's Bluetooth audio system. The digital screen illuminated brightly on my dashboard, displaying a large picture of my mother, Patricia. A tiny, foolish part of my brain actually wondered if she was calling to apologize to me. Perhaps she had just found out that Dion had thrown all of my personal belongings out into a public hallway, and she was calling to intervene as a responsible parent should. But 33 long years of living as her scapegoat daughter told me a completely different story. I took a very deep breath, gripping the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned bright white. I braced myself mentally and emotionally for whatever toxicity was about to come pouring through the speakers, and I firmly pressed the green answer button. "Hello, Mother," I said in a perfectly even and controlled tone, keeping my eyes locked straight on the long stretch of highway ahead of me. "Stella, darling." Patricia chirped immediately. Her voice was dripping with a sickly sweet, artificial tone that instantly put all of my senses on high alert. "I know you are probably feeling a little upset right now about the whole apartment situation, but you really need to grow up and look at the bigger picture. Brittany and Dion are stepping into massive corporate leadership roles today. They simply have to maintain a certain high-level executive image. It is nothing personal against you, sweetheart. It is just standard business protocol. You understand basic business, do you not?" I pressed my lips together tightly, refusing to let her condescending tone break my composure. "Yes, Mother," I replied calmly. "I understand business perfectly well, which is why I am currently driving out to a dusty, abandoned farmhouse while the two people who literally just stole my housing security deposit play make-believe in a downtown luxury apartment." Patricia sighed heavily into the phone. It was a loud, dramatic, and practiced sound designed to make me feel like I was being an unreasonable burden to her. "Oh, please stop being so incredibly dramatic, Stella. That defensive attitude is exactly why I am calling you right now. I want to give you a genuine chance to make things right with your sister and your brother-in-law. I want to give you the golden opportunity to finally be a supportive, useful part of this family for once in your life." I almost laughed out loud at the absolute absurdity of her statement. Make things right. I was the one who had just been publicly insulted. "How exactly do you suggest I go about doing that, Mother?" I asked her, genuinely curious to see the bottomless depths of her financial delusion. "Well," Patricia began, her voice suddenly speeding up with intense, greedy excitement. As you know, Dion is the newly appointed co-chief executive officer of the company. Starting tomorrow, he will be meeting with major corporate investors and wealthy politicians. He absolutely cannot be seen driving around the city in his current vehicle. It simply does not project the right level of immense success and power. So Brittany and I have found the absolute perfect solution to this problem. There is a gorgeous sports car available at the luxury dealership right now. It is exactly what he needs to look the part. And what exactly does any of that have to do with me? I asked. A cold realization was already creeping into my chest. We need you to take out a mortgage on the farmhouse immediately, Patricia stated flatly, sounding as if she were asking me to simply pick up a cheap carton of milk. The property is completely paid off, so the bank will easily approve a massive home equity loan for you. We only need $200,000 in cash. You can pull the money out, wire it directly to Dion by tomorrow morning, and consider it your generous congratulatory gift to them. It is a brilliant investment in the family brand. I was completely stunned. You want me to take out a massive mortgage on the very last piece of property I own just to buy Dion a $200,000 sports car? Do not use that ungrateful tone with me, Patricia snapped viciously. Her sweet facade dropped. You owe this family, Stella. You have always owed us. You were never the beautiful, charming daughter who made me look good at our country club events. You were always a massive social disappointment to me. The absolute least you can do to make up for your endless shortcomings is to make yourself useful financially. Her cruel words permanently snapped the last thread of my obligation to her. Mother, I said, my voice taking on an icy register. I am not taking out a mortgage. The family bank is officially closed and the free rides are permanently over. Do not ever call this number again. I hung up the phone. The drive ended as I pulled onto the gravel driveway of my grandfather's property. The sun had finally dipped below the Texas horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the overgrown front yard. From the outside, the farmhouse looked exactly how Brittany had gleefully described it. It was a dilapidated single-story wooden structure with peeling white paint, a sagging front porch, and shutters that hung sideways on rusted hinges. My mother and sister had always hated this place. They called it an embarrassing eyesore and constantly begged my grandfather to sell it to developers so they could use the cash for luxury vacations. But he had always stubbornly refused. I parked my practical sedan near the sagging wooden porch and turned off the hot engine. The silence was absolute, a stark contrast to the screaming demands my mother had just hurled at me over the phone. I carried my heavy cardboard boxes inside my footsteps, echoing on the dusty, warped hardwood floors. The stagnant indoor air smelled strongly of old paper and stale dust. It was completely empty of furniture stripped bare years ago when my grandfather was moved into the hospice facility. But I was not here to unpack my clothes or set up a bedroom. I walked straight past the empty living room and headed toward the narrow door located at the back of the kitchen, which led down to the cellar. The wooden stairs creaked dangerously under my weight as I descended into the pitch-black basement. I pulled out my cell phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping the bright beam across the damp concrete walls and the maze of exposed plumbing. At first glance, it was just an ordinary forgotten storage space filled with empty mason jars and broken wooden chairs. But I remembered the cryptic words Mister Caldwell had spoken to me in the parking lot. He had told me to take the confidential envelope straight to the farmhouse because I would know exactly what to do with the numbers hidden inside. I walked toward the back wall of the basement, brushing away thick cobwebs. Behind a stack of rotting wooden pallets, my flashlight beam caught a dull metallic gleam. I pushed the heavy pallets aside, my breathing growing shallow. There, completely hidden from casual view, was a heavy reinforced steel security door. It looked entirely out of place in a decaying farmhouse. It was the kind of commercial-grade security door you would find in a bank vault or a high-end corporate facility. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the rusty iron key attached to the faded yellow tag. The very same key Brittany had tossed across the lawyer's desk, mocking me. and telling me to go drive a tractor. I slid the rusty key into the modern electronic lock mechanism. It slid in and fit perfectly. I slowly turned it to the right. A heavy, satisfying mechanical click echoed through the dark basement. I pushed the heavy steel door open and reached inside to flick a light switch. A row of bright fluorescent lights instantly hummed to life, illuminating a space that took my breath away. This was not a dusty farm cellar. It was a pristine, climate-controlled state-of-the-art home office. The air was cool and smelled of ozone and expensive electronics. The floor was covered in clean commercial carpet. In the center of the room sat a massive mahogany desk, perfectly organized. But what truly shocked me were the walls. They were lined from floor to ceiling with locked, fireproof filing cabinets. And in the far corner, a towering black rack of commercial computer servers sat silently, their indicator lights blinking green and blue. My grandfather was not the senile, out-of-touch old man that my mother and sister always claimed he was. While they were busy spending his money on designer clothes and throwing lavish parties in the city, he had been down here meticulously tracking every single penny of his empire in absolute secrecy. He had built a shadow office completely isolated from the main corporate headquarters where Brittany now sat on her stolen throne. I walked over to the server rack and pressed the main power button. The massive machines roared to life, their cooling fans spinning up with a loud industrial hum. I sat down in the heavy leather executive chair behind the mahogany desk. I placed the thick manila envelope sealed with red security tape onto the polished wood surface. The word confidential stared back at me in bold black letters. I took a deep breath, grabbed a silver letter opener from the desk, and sliced through the thick tape. I pulled out a stack of highly sensitive financial documents and spread them out under the bright desk lamp. As a forensic accountant, I have spent my entire professional career hunting down corporate fraud, exposing hidden assets, and unraveling complex webs of deceit for high-net-worth clients. I know exactly how to read the story that numbers tell. And the story lying on my grandfather's desk was absolutely devastating. I booted up the desktop computer, which was hardwired directly into the server rack. It prompted me for a password. I typed in the serial number, stamped on the back of the rusty tractor key, and the system unlocked immediately. Folders containing decades of corporate ledgers, tax returns, and private bank statements flooded the screen. I cross-referenced the digital data with the physical documents Mr. Caldwell had given me. The golden illusion of my incredibly wealthy, perfect family began to shatter into a million jagged pieces right in front of my eyes. Brittany and Dion thought they had inherited a $15 million logistics empire. They thought they had secured endless wealth and absolute power. But as my eyes scanned the hidden liabilities column, I realized my grandfather had given them something else entirely. He had handed them a poisoned chalice. Their financial destruction was already guaranteed. I sat in the glow of the massive computer monitors, the humming of the commercial servers filling the cold basement air. For the next several hours, the outside world completely ceased to exist. As a 33-year-old forensic accountant, I have spent countless late nights dissecting corporate fraud and tracing hidden money through complicated global networks. My daily life consists of finding the exact spots where greedy people try to hide their darkest financial sins. But I had never audited my own family before. I started by opening the official company ledgers for Harrison Logistics. These were the exact same numbers that had been presented to Brittany and Dion at the law office earlier that afternoon. On the surface, everything looked absolutely perfect. The company boasted a $15 million valuation. The quarterly profit margins appeared healthy, the client roster was packed with major state contracts, and the operational cash flow looked solid. It was a beautiful, shining picture of immense corporate success. It was exactly the kind of shiny bait that a greedy, superficial person like my sister would swallow without a single second of hesitation. But forensic accounting is never about looking at the beautiful surface. It is about digging relentlessly into the dirty foundation underneath. I knew my grandfather. He was a brilliant, meticulous man who never took a single number at face value. If he had built a secret climate-controlled server room in the basement of an abandoned farmhouse, it meant there was a second set of books, a shadow ledger. I cross-referenced the main corporate tax identification number with a hidden file folder named simply Liabilities and Contingencies. I clicked the mouse, opened the encrypted spreadsheet, and the beautiful illusion of Harrison Logistics instantly vaporized. My eyes scanned row after row of terrifying red numbers. The official ledger showed the company owning a massive fleet of modern delivery trucks. But the hidden ledger revealed the horrifying truth. Those trucks were not owned outright. They were heavily leased under predatory high-interest corporate financing agreements that were months behind on payments. My grandfather had aggressively leveraged every single physical asset the company possessed just to keep the daily operations afloat during his final 2 years of declining health. The deeper I dug into the digital files, the worse the financial carnage became. There were massive unpaid federal tax liens quietly pending against the corporate headquarters. There were huge outstanding balances owed to third-party maintenance vendors who were threatening immediate legal action. And then I found the corporate credit accounts. My grandfather had maxed out millions of dollars in short-term high-risk commercial loans to cover the incredibly expensive payroll for his hundreds of employees. He had essentially been running the company on financial fumes, borrowing from tomorrow to pay for today. I pulled out a blank notepad and a pen from the mahogany desk and began calculating the true, unvarnished net worth of the business my sister had just inherited. I added up the predatory leases, the looming tax liens, the vendor debts, and the maxed-out commercial loans. When I finally drew a thick black line at the bottom of the page and wrote down the final total, my breath hitched in my throat. Harrison Logistics was not worth $15 million. It was completely underwater. It was drowning in exactly $20 million of highly toxic immediate debt. I leaned back in the heavy leather executive chair, staring at the number written on my notepad. $20 million in the red. A slow, deeply satisfying smile spread across my face as the absolute genius of my grandfather's final plan became perfectly clear. He was not a foolish old man who was blinded by my sister's beautiful blonde hair and fake smiles. He knew exactly who Brittany was. He knew she was violently greedy, incredibly lazy, and obsessed with the hollow illusion of wealth. He also knew that Dion was a completely empty suit who used corporate buzzwords to hide his utter lack of actual business talent. My grandfather had deliberately set a massive glittering trap for them. He wrote his will to give Brittany exactly what she always demanded. He gave her the crown, the title of Chief Executive Officer, and the total ownership of the company. But he purposefully hid the massive debt from the official estate documents. He handed my cruel, entitled sister a ticking financial time bomb, knowing her massive ego would prevent her from ever doing a proper audit before accepting the inheritance. Brittany and Dion thought they had just been handed the keys to a kingdom of endless luxury. In reality, they had just willingly signed up to be the legal guarantors of a bankrupt sinking ship. As the new corporate officers, they were now personally liable for the massive financial disaster my grandfather had carefully orchestrated. I thought back to the phone call from my mother, Patricia, demanding that I take out a $200,000 mortgage to buy Dion a fancy imported sports car. She had called me a cold, ungrateful daughter for refusing to fund their ridiculous new lifestyle. If she only knew the absolute financial apocalypse that was speeding toward her golden child, she would be on her knees begging for my forgiveness. They had thrown my belongings into a public hallway and laughed at my cheap accounting degree. But my degree was the only thing standing between me and total financial ruin. My grandfather had protected me. By leaving me this dusty farmhouse, he shielded me from the corporate liability that was about to destroy my vicious family. I was the absolute victor. I did not have to lift a single finger to completely destroy them. Their own blinding, arrogant greed would do all the heavy lifting for me. I smiled, turning back to the massive server rack. I needed to print every document before examiners showed up at their door. The trap was perfectly set, the timer ticking down to 0. I sat in the glow of the computer monitors for what felt like hours. The heavy office printer in the corner of the basement hummed loudly as it spit out page after page of absolute financial disaster. I watched the thick stack of printed ledgers grow higher and higher on the mahogany desk. My grandfather's brilliant trap was perfectly executed. Brittany and Dion were currently celebrating their new ownership of a logistics company that was drowning in $20 million of toxic debt. But as I gathered the warm sheets of paper and organized them into neat stacks, a sudden thought crossed my highly analytical mind. If the company was completely underwater and heavily leveraged to the absolute maximum limit, why had the aggressive commercial banks not seized the physical operating facilities yet? In standard corporate bankruptcy scenarios, the creditors immediately go after the most valuable tangible assets. For a massive trucking empire, those assets are always the corporate headquarters, the massive parking depots, and the commercial warehouses. I put down the financial ledgers and reached across the desk for the original manila envelope Mr. Caldwell had given me in the parking lot. I pulled out the single sheet of thick parchment paper that represented my entire inheritance. It was the physical property deed to the farmhouse. When Brittany had thrown the rusty tractor key at me and mocked my inheritance, I had assumed this property was nothing more than a decaying house sitting on a tiny plot of worthless dirt. I assumed it was a sentimental token left behind by an old man who had nothing else to give. But my grandfather was not a sentimental fool. He was a ruthless, brilliant strategist. I smoothed the thick paper out on the desk and began to read the dense legal text under the bright desk lamp. I read the property boundaries and the county parcel identification numbers. My heart began to beat a little faster. This was not just a simple residential deed for a rundown farmhouse. According to the county documentation in my hands, the property was officially zoned as commercial agricultural land. And it did not just cover the small front yard and the sagging wooden porch. The deed explicitly stated that my inheritance encompassed exactly 500 acres of prime real estate. I quickly turned back to the glowing computer monitors and opened a new secure web browser. I navigated directly to the official property tax database for the county. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard as I typed in the specific parcel identification numbers listed on the deed. I needed to see exactly what 500 acres looked like on a modern map. The county database slowly loaded, bringing up a highly detailed satellite image of the rural area surrounding the farmhouse. I zoomed in on the property lines highlighted in bright red. The red boundary line started at the gravel driveway of the farmhouse, but it did not stop there. It kept going. The massive red square stretched for miles across the digital map. I followed the boundary line with my mouse cursor, my eyes growing wide with absolute shock as the visual reality of my inheritance finally clicked into place. The red lines encompassed the empty fields behind the house, but then they crossed right over the main county highway and wrapped entirely around a massive commercial development located about 2 miles down the road. I zoomed in closer on that specific commercial development, my breath completely caught in my throat. I was staring straight down at a sprawling corporate campus. I saw a massive glass office building. I saw 3 gigantic steel warehouses. And I saw a paved parking depot filled with dozens of commercial delivery trucks. I leaned incredibly close to the monitor, completely unable to believe what I was seeing. Painted in massive white letters across the roof of the largest steel warehouse were the words, Harrison Logistics, the entire corporate headquarters, the primary trucking depot, the massive storage facilities. Every single physical structure that allowed my sister's newly inherited company to function was sitting squarely inside the bright red boundary lines of my property. Brittany did not own the land underneath her corporate empire. She only owned the heavily indebted corporate entity itself. I owned the actual ground they were standing on. I was holding the deed to the most valuable, untouchable asset in our entire family history. My grandfather had deliberately separated the physical real estate from the corporate business structure decades ago. He had protected the land from the aggressive creditors, the toxic commercial loans, and the massive federal tax liens that were currently suffocating the company. The banks could not seize the headquarters because the logistics company did not actually own the headquarters. The company was merely a tenant. And as of today, I was the sole legal owner of that land. I was the landlord. A wave of pure, undeniable power washed over me. Brittany had stood in that fancy law office and laughed at me. She told me to go count weeds in the dirt. Dion had thrown all of my personal belongings out into a public hallway because he thought he was a powerful chief executive officer who no longer needed to respect the family scapegoat. My mother had demanded I take out a mortgage on this very land to buy Dion a luxury sports car. They had treated me like absolute garbage because they thought I was powerless, but they were blindly operating on my land. I immediately turned away from the computer and went to the heavy fireproof filing cabinets lining the basement wall. I needed to find the official commercial land lease agreement between Harrison Logistics and my grandfather's estate. I pulled open the heavy metal drawers and searched through the meticulously labeled folders. Within minutes, I found a thick folder labeled Corporate Land Lease. I carried it back to the mahogany desk and opened it. The contract was a standard commercial triple net lease. It outlined the monthly rent that the logistics company was required to pay to the estate for the right to use the 500 acres of land. I flipped straight to the final page to check the expiration dates and the penalty clauses. My grandfather had thought of absolutely everything. The master lease agreement had officially expired exactly 1 month ago. He had deliberately chosen not to renew the contract before he passed away. There was no holdover provision protecting the tenant. That meant Harrison Logistics was currently occupying my massive commercial property without a valid legal lease. They were legally trespassing. And according to the strict penalty clauses clearly outlined in the expired contract, any unauthorized holdover tenancy resulted in immediate massive financial penalties and gave the landlord the absolute right to demand immediate eviction. I slowly closed the thick folder and patted the cover with my hand. Brittany thought she was the untouchable queen of a massive corporate empire. She was about to find out the incredibly hard way that a fake queen is absolutely nothing when she does not even legally own the incredibly valuable dirt directly beneath her stolen corporate throne. The next morning, I woke up early on the hard wooden floor of the empty farmhouse living room. I made myself a simple cup of black coffee and walked straight back down into the climate-controlled basement. I sat at my grandfather's mahogany desk and woke up the massive computer servers. As a forensic accountant, I know that one of the biggest mistakes corporate fraudsters make is assuming nobody is watching their live transactions. My grandfather had set up his shadow network to mirror the main corporate banking portal in real time. I opened the main operating accounts for Harrison Logistics and clicked on the corporate credit card ledgers. The numbers I saw flashing across the screen were absolutely staggering. Brittany and Dion had not wasted a single second. Within 24 hours of leaving the lawyer's office, they had requested emergency limit increases on 3 separate corporate credit accounts. And because the banks had not yet realized the company was completely insolvent, the automated systems had actually approved the increases. I watched the live transaction feed with morbid fascination. At 10 in the morning, a charge for $45,000 cleared at a high-end luxury car dealership downtown. That was the down payment for Dion's new imported sports car. An hour later, a charge for $12,000 posted from a designer boutique. Brittany was apparently updating her executive wardrobe with silk suits and designer handbags. I opened a new tab on the computer browser and logged into my social media accounts. If the bank ledgers told the financial story, my mother's Facebook page provided the absolute perfect visual documentary of their incredible greed. Patricia had uploaded a massive photo album titled The New Royal Family of Austin. The first picture showed Brittany and Dion standing on the deck of a massive multi-level rented yacht docked at the local marina. Brittany was wearing a pure white designer dress holding a crystal glass of expensive champagne. Dion was standing next to her in a linen suit wearing a brand new luxury watch that I knew for a fact he had just charged to the company expense account. The caption under the photo was written by my mother. It read, So proud of my beautiful daughter and brilliant son-in-law. They are finally stepping into the massive success they deserve. Hard work pays off when you have the vision to lead an empire. Some people are just born for greatness, while others are just meant to live in the dirt. It was a direct vicious insult aimed right at me. She could not just celebrate her golden child. She had to use her public platform to kick me while she thought I was completely defeated. I scrolled down to the comments section. All my aunts, uncles, and cousins were leaving fawning messages praising Brittany and begging for invitations to the next party. The next post on my mother's timeline was a live video recorded from the upper deck of the rented yacht. I pressed play and turned up the volume on the computer speakers. The loud thumping bass of club music filled the quiet basement. The camera panned across a crowd of local socialites and minor celebrities. Brittany and Dion had clearly invited anyone with a high social status to their little inauguration party, desperately trying to buy their way into the elite circles of the city. In the center of the frame, Dion was standing on a white leather sofa. He was shouting over the loud music, waving a sleek black corporate credit card in the air. "Waitress," he yelled at a young woman carrying a silver tray. "Bring us 5 more bottles of your most expensive vintage champagne. Put it on the company tab. We are celebrating a massive acquisition today." The crowd around him cheered loudly. Brittany blew kisses to the camera, shouting that Harrison Logistics was about to take over the world. I paused the video, right on Dion's arrogant smiling face. I looked back at the live banking ledger on my other monitor. That single yacht party had just drained another $30,000 of borrowed commercial credit. They were literally setting money on fire. They were acting like untouchable billionaires, completely blind to the fact that they were dancing on the deck of a sinking ship. Every single dollar they spent on that yacht, every designer dress, and every bottle of champagne was adding personal liability to their names. When a corporate entity goes bankrupt due to gross financial mismanagement and the illegal misuse of corporate funds for personal luxury, the corporate veil is pierced. That means the executives become personally responsible for the debt. I closed the social media tab. I had seen enough. The extreme anger that my mother and sister always tried to provoke in me was completely absent. Instead, I felt a deep, overwhelming sense of cold focus. I opened a blank legal document on the computer and began to type. As the legal owner of the 500 acres of commercial land that their entire logistics empire was built upon, I had a tremendous amount of paperwork to prepare. I started by drafting the formal commercial eviction notice. Under Texas commercial real estate law, a holdover tenant occupying a property with an expired lease is not entitled to a lengthy residential eviction process. I could legally demand that they vacate the premises immediately. I typed out the property boundaries, citing the specific county parcel identification numbers I had found on my grandfather's deed. Then I drafted the financial demand letter. According to the penalty clauses in the expired triple net lease, Harrison Logistics owed the estate exactly $5 million in retroactive rent late fees and unauthorized holdover penalties. I itemized the charges meticulously, applying my forensic accounting skills to ensure every single decimal point was legally bulletproof. I printed the commercial eviction notice and the $5 million financial demand letter on thick, high-quality legal paper. The heavy printer churned out the documents that would completely destroy my sister's arrogant illusion. I arranged the papers neatly on the mahogany desk and signed my name at the bottom in bold blue ink. Stella, the sole property owner and legal landlord. I carefully placed the signed documents into a fresh yellow manila envelope. While Brittany and Dion were busy pouring expensive vintage champagne into crystal glasses on a rented yacht, and while my mother was busy bragging to the entire extended family about their limitless wealth, I was quietly sharpening the legal axe that would sever their heads. They thought they had buried the family scapegoat in the dirt. They did not realize they had actually planted a seed that was about to tear their entire foundation apart. I turned off the bright desk lamp and walked up the wooden stairs, leaving the humming computer servers behind in the dark basement. When the sun finally rose tomorrow morning, the large commercial banks would inevitably open. By tomorrow morning, the harsh and brutal reality of their massive corporate debt would finally collide with their reckless spending spree. The golden child had enjoyed her beautiful, expensive fantasy for exactly one day. It was time for her to wake up to a massive and completely unavoidable financial nightmare. At exactly 8 in the morning, I walked through the towering glass doors of the largest commercial bank in downtown Austin. The lobby was a massive expanse of polished white marble and gleaming brass fixtures designed to make ordinary people feel small and insignificant. The vaulted ceilings echoed with the quiet conversations of wealthy investors and busy financial executives. But I did not feel small today. I walked straight past the regular teller lines and took the private executive elevator up to the top floor. For the past 5 years, I have worked as a highly specialized independent contractor for this specific banking institution. Whenever a massive corporate entity applies for a high-risk commercial credit line, the bank brings me in as a forensic auditor to tear the financial applications apart and find the hidden liabilities. It is a highly lucrative position that my family knew absolutely nothing about. My mother and sister always assumed my accounting degree meant I sat in a tiny gray cubicle filling out basic tax returns for minimum wage. They never bothered to ask about the reality of my career, because they did not care about anything that did not directly benefit them. I walked into the main glass-walled conference room, where the senior commercial branch manager, Mr. Thompson, was already waiting for me. I placed my heavy leather briefcase on the polished mahogany table and pulled out the thick stack of financial documents I had printed in my grandfather's secret basement the night before. Today was going to be a masterpiece of financial destruction. We did not have to wait very long for the entertainment to begin. Through the thick glass walls of the conference room, I could clearly see the private executive waiting area near the elevators. At exactly 9 in the morning, the silver doors slid open and my sister Brittany stepped out. She was wearing a brand new white silk designer suit that she had undoubtedly charged to the company credit card just yesterday. She was carrying a limited edition leather handbag and wearing massive dark sunglasses indoors like a Hollywood celebrity, avoiding the paparazzi. Right behind her walked her husband, Dayon. He was wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit that hugged his shoulders perfectly. On his left wrist, the heavy gold luxury watch he had bought with stolen corporate funds caught the bright office lights and gleamed brightly. They strutted across the thick carpeted floor with their heads held high, treating the bank staff like personal servants. I watched as Dion snapped his fingers at a young receptionist demanding a glass of sparkling water with lemon while they waited. They were putting on a massive theatrical performance, desperately trying to project the image of untouchable billionaires. They honestly believed that if they simply acted wealthy enough and spoke with enough aggressive confidence, the commercial bank would blindly hand them the massive $10 million line of credit they desperately needed to keep their fake corporate empire afloat. They had absolutely no idea that their entire financial history was currently sitting in a neat stack right in front of me. Mr. Thompson looked at his watch and nodded to his executive assistant. The assistant opened the heavy glass doors of the conference room and invited the new corporate officers of Harrison Logistics inside. Brittany and Dion walked into the room radiating pure arrogance. Dion was already talking loudly before he even pulled out his leather executive chair, boasting about their massive new expansion plans and the yacht party they had hosted the previous night for local politicians and socialites. He walked toward the head of the long table, extending his hand toward Mr. Thompson with a wide, predatory smile. But then his eyes shifted slightly to the right. He saw me sitting quietly in the leather chair right next to the branch manager. Dion froze, completely solid. His hand hung awkwardly in the empty air. The arrogant smile instantly melted right off his face, replaced by a look of profound confusion. Brittany walked in right behind him, still adjusting her expensive sunglasses. When she finally looked up and saw me sitting there, she actually took a physical step backward. "What on earth are you doing here, Stella?" she demanded, her voice shrill and entirely inappropriate for a professional corporate environment. "Did Mother send you here to beg for a loan? Because I already told you we are not giving you a single penny of our corporate profits. You need to leave right now before I have security escort you out of the building." This is a private meeting for high net worth executives. I did not move a single muscle. I did not flinch or look away. I simply looked up at her shocked face and offered a very small, cold smile. Mr. Thompson frowned deeply at my sister's unprofessional outburst. He cleared his throat loudly and gestured toward me with his hand. "Excuse me, Miss Harrison," he said in a firm, authoritative tone. "I believe there is a significant misunderstanding here. You do not have the authority to ask anyone to leave this room. This is Miss Stella, our lead independent forensic auditor. The bank has officially retained her specialized services to thoroughly review your current application for a $10 million commercial line of credit. Given the massive size of the requested loan, the current economic climate, and the sudden change in your corporate leadership structure, her presence here today is absolutely mandatory." Dion's jaw practically hit the polished wooden table. He stared at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. His perfectly tailored suit suddenly looked a little too tight around his collar. He started stammering, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Now wait just a minute, Mr. Thompson," Dion said, his voice cracking slightly. "This is a massive conflict of interest. She is the estranged sister of my wife. She is a low-level tax clerk who is just incredibly jealous of our massive success. She is completely unqualified to audit a multi-million-dollar logistics empire. She belongs on a dirt farm, not in a high-level corporate boardroom. You need to bring in a real professional immediately before I pull my accounts and take my incredibly valuable business to a competing bank." Mr. Thompson folded his hands on the table and looked at Dion with absolute icy professionalism. "Miss Stella is one of the most respected forensic accountants in the state of Texas," he replied coldly. "She is highly qualified and the bank implicitly trusts her financial judgment. Now please take a seat so we can begin this review." I reached out and opened the thick financial folder resting on the table. My grandfather's secret documents were perfectly organized inside. I looked directly at Dion and watched a single drop of sweat slowly roll down the side of his face. The trap was finally sprung, and there was absolutely nowhere left for them to run. Their entire world was about to completely collapse right inside this room. This was the exact moment their arrogant fantasy died. I was no longer the scapegoat of the family. I was the executioner. Dayon leaned across the polished mahogany table and pointed a manicured finger directly at my face. He puffed out his chest, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me. "Listen to me very carefully, Stella," he growled, his voice vibrating with barely contained rage. "I am the co-chief executive officer of a massive logistics empire. I have powerful local politicians on my personal speed dial. I am not going to sit here and let a bitter low-level tax clerk sabotage my business just because she got left with nothing but a pile of dirt. Pack up your little briefcase and walk out that door right now, or I promise you I will personally ensure you never work in the financial sector of this city ever again." "Mr. Thompson." The branch manager opened his mouth to intervene, but I held up my hand. Instead, I felt an overwhelming sense of absolute inner calm. Dion was a barking dog backed into a corner. He had absolutely no power here. I slowly opened the thick manila folder resting in front of me and pulled out their $10 million commercial loan application, laying it flat on the table. "Let us review the application, Dion," I said, my voice flat. "You are asking this bank for an unsecured $10 million line of credit to expand operations. On page 3, you claim that Harrison Logistics has a spotless financial record." I slid a document across the table. It was the shadow ledger I printed from my grandfather's secret servers. "This is your actual corporate credit report from all 3 major bureaus," I continued. "Your company does not have a pristine score. Your current corporate rating is officially classified as junk. You have massive outstanding tax liens. You are months behind on your fleet leases, and you maxed out every short-term commercial loan available." Brittany let out a loud gasp. Her face turned a sickening shade of pale gray. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her eyes darting frantically. "We have a $15 million company. The lawyer said so yesterday. We have massive corporate assets. You have a $15 million gross valuation on paper, Brittany," I corrected her sharply. But you also inherited $20 million in toxic debt. Your company is technically insolvent. You are underwater by $5 million. Dion aggressively slammed his hands down. She is lying to you, he shouted. She fabricated those numbers. You cannot listen to her, Mr. Thompson. I ignored his screaming. But the junk credit rating is not even the most interesting part, I said, tapping my pen. Let us look at page 5. Dion, you personally signed this page under penalty of perjury. You claimed that the company holds $5 million in liquid cash reserves. Where exactly did you get that number, Dion? According to the live banking feeds I audited this morning, you and Brittany drained the last remaining corporate liquidity yesterday to buy a luxury sports car, designer clothes, and a yacht party. Mr. Thompson adjusted his glasses, looking at Dion with absolute disgust. Falsifying liquid assets on a loan application is federal bank fraud, he said, his voice icy. We do not take these matters lightly. I am not finished yet, I said, pulling out the final document. The application lists the commercial real estate the corporate headquarters is built on as physical collateral. You claimed ownership of the land, but as we both know, you do not own that land. My grandfather left that specific 500-acre parcel to me. You are currently a holdover tenant occupying my property without a valid lease. You attempted to pledge my personal property as collateral for your fraudulent loan. The silence in the conference room was absolute. The loud, arrogant billionaires had been completely reduced to terrified children. Dion was sweating profusely. Brittany was staring at the documents as if they were venomous snakes. Mr. Thompson closed his folder with a loud, definitive snap. The review is officially over, he announced. Harrison Logistics, your application for the $10 million commercial line of credit is emphatically denied. Furthermore, based on the evidence of gross financial misrepresentation and your junk credit status, I am revoking all of your active corporate credit lines with this institution effective immediately. We will be immediately freezing your accounts pending a full internal investigation. Brittany completely lost her mind. The reality finally crashed down on her delicate, arrogant shoulders. She jumped up from her leather chair, her designer sunglasses clattering to the floor. No, she screamed at the top of her lungs, her voice cracking with hysteria. You cannot do this to me. I am the chief executive officer. I am rich. I am supposed to be rich. Stella, you ruined everything. You ruined my life. She lunged forward to attack me across the table, but Dion grabbed her arm. He was completely panicked, looking desperately at the glass doors. Mr. Thompson immediately pressed the security button under his desk. Within seconds, 3 large uniformed security guards pushed through the conference room doors. Please escort these individuals out of the building, Mr. Thompson ordered calmly. Brittany threw a massive kicking, screaming tantrum as the security guards grabbed her arms. She dragged her high heels across the carpet, crying like a spoiled toddler. Dion tried to maintain his dignity, but the security guards shoved him forward, forcing him to walk out of the secure room. I sat quietly in my chair, watching through the glass walls as my sister and her husband were forcefully marched straight through the center of the incredibly busy main bank lobby. Hundreds of wealthy investors stopped what they were doing to stare at the hysterical woman in the expensive white silk suit and the sweating man being escorted out. It was the ultimate public humiliation. They walked into the bank demanding to be treated like royalty. They were thrown out into the hot street like absolute garbage to face their sudden ruin. The morning after I completely dismantled my sister's fraudulent commercial loan application at the bank, I arrived at my office feeling a profound sense of peace. My accounting firm is located in a prestigious high-rise building in downtown Austin. The environment is normally a sanctuary of absolute professionalism. The massive lobby features imported Italian marble floors, soft instrumental music, and a strict code of conduct. It is the exact opposite of the chaotic, screaming toxicity I grew up with. I was sitting at my desk, sipping a warm cup of herbal tea and reviewing a complex corporate merger file, assuming the worst of the family drama was finally over. I severely underestimated the sheer desperation of a narcissist who has just lost control. When toxic people realize they can no longer manipulate you in private, they will always attempt to destroy your reputation in public. At exactly 10 in the morning, the heavy glass doors of the firm were violently pushed open. I heard the massive commotion all the way from my private office down the hall. A loud, shrill voice was echoing through the quiet corridors, completely shattering the professional silence. I stood up from my desk and walked out into the main hallway. As I approached the central lobby, I saw several of my colleagues standing by their office doors, staring in absolute shock. I pushed through the double oak doors leading to the reception area and stopped dead in my tracks. Standing right in the middle of the pristine lobby, screaming at the top of her lungs at our terrified young receptionist, was my mother, Patricia. And standing right behind her, dabbing her dry eyes with a crumpled tissue and playing the perfect victim, was my sister, Brittany. "You need to call the senior partners out here this exact second," Patricia shrieked, slamming her hand down hard on the polished mahogany reception desk. "You are currently employing a dangerous, manipulative thief. I want everyone in this building to know exactly what kind of criminal is handling their sensitive financial documents." The receptionist, a young woman who had just recently graduated from college, looked absolutely terrified. She was frantically trying to dial the front desk security team. I took a very deep breath, smoothed down my professional blazer, and stepped out into the open lobby. "Mother," I said in a loud, commanding voice that instantly cut through her hysterical screaming. "What exactly do you think you are doing here in my place of business?" Patricia spun around to face me. Her face was flushed bright red with pure rage, and her eyes were wide with a frantic, desperate energy. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest. "There she is!" Patricia yelled, making sure every single wealthy client and senior accountant in the massive lobby could hear her clearly. "There is the absolute monster who manipulated a dying old man. She took advantage of her own grandfather while his mind was failing. She stole his property, and now she is trying to illegally bankrupt her own sister out of pure, bitter jealousy." Brittany stepped out from behind our mother, unleashing a fresh wave of fake theatrical sobs. "She completely ruined my life yesterday!" Brittany cried loudly, looking around at the gathered crowd. "My husband Dion and I were just honestly trying to run our amazing family business. We were providing hundreds of jobs for the local community. And Stella used her insider accounting knowledge to illegally block our corporate funding at the bank. She is holding our entire commercial headquarters hostage just because she has always been desperately jealous of my marriage and my massive success. She wants to see me completely homeless and begging on the cold street." It was a masterclass in toxic manipulation. They had realized they could not beat me legally, and they could not beat me financially. So they had resorted to their oldest and absolute favorite weapon, public humiliation. My mother marched right up to me, invading my personal space until I could smell the strong, cheap floral perfume she always wore. "I am going to give you one single chance to fix this, Stella," Patricia hissed, dropping her voice to a venomous whisper that was still loud enough for the front row of shocked spectators to hear. "I have the official property transfer documents right here in my designer purse. You are going to sign the farmhouse and the commercial land over to Brittany right now. If you refuse my generous offer, I will stand in this lobby all day long. I will call the local news stations and reporters. I will tell every single one of your wealthy clients that you are a massive fraud who commits elder abuse. I will make sure the senior partners fire you before lunch. You will lose your career, your reputation, your income, and absolutely everything you have ever worked so hard for." I looked calmly at the two women standing in front of me. For 33 years, this exact manipulative tactic had worked flawlessly on me. Whenever they caused a massive scene in a public place, I would always immediately back down, apologize profusely, and give them whatever they wanted just to make the embarrassing screaming stop. They fully expected me to crumble right now under the heavy weight of the public spectacle. They thought my professional reputation was my ultimate weakness, and that I would trade my incredibly valuable inheritance just to save my corporate job. They fundamentally misunderstood the powerful woman who I had finally become over the last few years. I did not feel fear. I did not feel any embarrassment. I just felt an overwhelming sense of deep pity for their absolute pathetic and embarrassing desperation. They thought they were destroying my life, but they were actually digging their own graves right in the middle of my office. I simply smiled at them in total silence as they continued to rant. I stood in the center of the polished marble lobby and listened to my mother scream her toxic demands. For my entire life, she had conditioned me to believe that causing a public scene was the ultimate weapon. She truly thought that the threat of professional embarrassment would instantly bring me to my knees. I looked at Brittany, who was still pretending to cry, wiping away invisible tears while secretly watching my face for any sign of surrender. They wanted me to panic. They wanted me to beg them to lower their voices and quietly hand over the deed to the commercial property, just to make the painful public humiliation stop. But I did not feel humiliated at all. I felt a profound sense of liberation. I did not work in a clerical pool where employees could be fired simply because an angry relative threw a tantrum. I worked in an elite accounting firm that dealt with hostile corporate litigation every single day. My colleagues were not judging me. They were judging the two hysterical women who had just trespassed into a highly secure corporate environment. Before I could even open my mouth to respond, the heavy oak doors at the end of the main hallway swung open. Walking toward us with slow, deliberate steps was Mr. Harrington. He is the founding senior partner of the firm. He is a man who commands absolute respect in the financial world, and he certainly does not tolerate loud, aggressive behavior in his lobby. The entire reception area fell completely silent as he approached. Even my mother instinctively took a half step backward, intimidated by his sheer presence. Mr. Harrington stopped right next to me and looked down at my mother with an expression of absolute coldness. "Excuse me, madam," he said, his voice echoing loudly in the quiet room. "I am the senior managing partner of this firm. I could hear your incredibly inappropriate shouting all the way from my private conference room. You are currently trespassing on private commercial property and harassing my people. I highly suggest you exit this building immediately before I have our building security physically remove you." My mother puffed out her chest, trying to regain her toxic authority. "You cannot speak to me that way," Patricia yelled. "I am doing you a massive favor by exposing the criminal you have working for you. Your employee Stella manipulated my dying father. She stole a multi-million-dollar property from my beautiful daughter and committed massive bank fraud to sabotage our family logistics company. You need to fire her right this exact second, or I am going to the local news and telling the entire city that your firm supports elder abuse and corporate theft." Mr. Harrington did not even blink. "Madam, you have just entered a highly public professional space," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "You have openly accused my employee of elder abuse, corporate theft, and federal bank fraud in front of dozens of professional witnesses. Do you have any certified legal documentation to back up these incredibly serious allegations? Do you have a police report, a federal indictment, or a court order?" My mother suddenly looked very unsure of herself. Her arrogant posture cracked. "Well, no," she stammered defensively. "But I am her mother, and I know exactly what she did. She is just a bitter, low-level tax clerk who wants to destroy her successful sister." Mr. Harrington offered a cold, sharp smile that held absolutely no warmth. "That is exactly what I thought," he replied. "Since you possess zero legal proof, what you are currently doing is committing textbook defamation of character and corporate slander. You are actively attempting to damage the professional reputation of this institution. Furthermore, you are operating under a massive delusion regarding Stella's position here. Stella is not a low-level tax clerk. She is a highly respected junior partner at this firm. She personally manages over $50 million in client portfolios, and she is one of the most brilliant forensic auditors in the entire state of Texas." The color completely drained from my mother's face. Brittany actually dropped her crumpled tissue on the floor, her mouth hanging open in pure shock. For 33 years, they had constantly belittled my career, assuming I was just a miserable failure because I did not demand constant attention like Brittany did. The sudden realization that I was actually incredibly successful, that I held a powerful executive title and commanded deep respect completely shattered their toxic narrative. They realized in that exact moment that they had absolutely zero power over me. I was completely out of their reach. "If you do not leave this lobby in exactly 10 seconds," Mr. Harrington continued smoothly, "I will personally instruct our corporate legal team to file a massive defamation lawsuit against both of you. We will sue you for everything you own. Given the extreme financial distress your logistics company is currently facing, which Stella thoroughly documented during her independent bank audit yesterday, I highly doubt you can afford to fight a multi-million-dollar slander lawsuit against a major corporate law firm. Now get out of my building." My mother opened her mouth to argue, but absolutely no words came out. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and utter disbelief. She finally saw me not as her obedient scapegoat, but as an incredibly powerful woman who held the absolute capability to destroy her. Brittany grabbed my mother's arm frantically, pulling her toward the glass exit doors. They did not say another word. They turned around and practically ran out of the quiet lobby, retreating into the hot city streets like beaten animals. I watched the heavy glass doors swing shut behind them, feeling a massive weight lift off my shoulders. I turned to Mr. Harrington and nodded my appreciation. He simply smiled back, patted my shoulder, and told me to get back to work. I walked back to my private office, knowing that the final battle was rapidly approaching, and I was holding all the winning cards. The attempt to publicly shame me had completely backfired in the most spectacular way possible. They had walked into my sanctuary hoping to strip away my livelihood, but instead, they had only exposed their own pathetic weakness. The countdown to their total corporate eviction had officially begun. After the disastrous public spectacle my mother and sister caused in the lobby of my accounting firm, I knew it was time to finalize the legal trap. I packed up my briefcase and drove straight across town to the law offices of Mr. Caldwell. The Texas sun was beating down on the windshield, but inside my car the air conditioning was blasting and my mind was ice cold. I walked into the quiet mahogany-paneled reception area of the law firm. Mr. Caldwell was already waiting for me in his private office. He poured 2 cups of black coffee and directed me to sit at his large wooden desk. I opened my leather briefcase and pulled out the thick stack of financial ledgers I had discovered in my grandfather's secret basement server room. I also placed the original property deed and the expired commercial land lease right in the center of his desk. I calmly explained the stolen security deposit, the yacht spending spree, and how I denied their fraudulent $10 million loan application at the commercial bank. I also detailed my mother's desperate attempt to get me fired this morning. Mr. Caldwell listened to my entire story without saying a single word. When I finally finished speaking, he simply adjusted his glasses, leaned back in his heavy leather chair, and let out a long, satisfied sigh. "Your grandfather always told me you had a spine made of solid steel, Stella," he said, his voice filled with immense pride. He knew Brittany and Dion would hang themselves with their own incredible greed, but he also knew you were the only person smart enough to actually kick the chair out from under them. Mr. Caldwell leaned forward and picked up the expired commercial land lease. As a forensic accountant, I had already calculated the massive financial liabilities, but I needed an expert in Texas commercial real estate law to officially draft the execution orders. We went through the master lease line by line. Texas law is incredibly strict when it comes to commercial holdover tenants. Unlike residential renters who have massive legal protections, commercial entities are treated purely as business arrangements. When a commercial lease expires, the landlord has the absolute right to demand immediate possession of the property. There is no mandatory 30-day waiting period, and there are no emotional appeals. Brittany and Dion were currently operating a massive logistics empire on my 500 acres of private land without a single shred of legal permission. They were trespassing on a massive corporate scale. Mr. Caldwell pulled out a fresh legal pad and began writing down the formal eviction timeline. "Because they are storing highly valuable third-party freight on your property, we must execute a commercial lockout," he explained carefully. "We will post the formal eviction notice directly on the main glass doors of their corporate headquarters. The local county sheriffs will physically escort them off the premises, and we will immediately change the locks on every single building and warehouse. But the eviction was only the first half of my grandfather's brilliant trap. The second half was the financial death blow. I pulled out my own notepad and showed Mr. Caldwell the forensic penalty calculations I had completed the night before. According to the extremely aggressive penalty clauses my grandfather had purposefully written into the original lease, any unauthorized holdover tenancy triggered an immediate retroactive rent increase of 300%. Furthermore, the tenant became instantly responsible for all pending property taxes, maintenance fees, and legal costs. I walked Mr. Caldwell through my spreadsheet. I added the base rent, the massive percentage multipliers, the daily late fees, and the compounding interest. The final number sitting at the bottom of my page was absolutely staggering. Brittany and Dion legally owed me exactly $5 million in immediate cash. Mr. Caldwell carefully reviewed my math and nodded his head in complete agreement. The numbers are legally bulletproof, he confirmed. They signed the original corporate documents accepting these exact penalty terms years ago. They simply never bothered to read the fine print because they always assumed they would just inherit the land along with the business. For the next 3 hours, Mr. Caldwell and I sat in his quiet office drafting the most devastating legal documents my family had ever seen. We typed up the formal commercial eviction notice, citing the exact Texas property codes and highlighting the expired lease dates. Then we drafted the official financial demand letter outlining the $5 million debt. Every single word was sharp, precise, and completely devoid of emotion. There was no room for manipulation or crying. It was pure cold business. Mr. Caldwell printed the final documents on thick legal paper with his firm's official seal. He slid the papers across the desk and handed me a heavy gold pen. I looked down at the signature line. For 33 years, I was the silent scapegoat. I was told I was worthless and destined to be nothing more than a lonely clerk. Now I was holding the pen that would completely dismantle a fake billionaire lifestyle. I signed my name with strong, steady strokes. The trap was fully set and officially loaded. Brittany and Dion were hosting a massive catered Chief Executive Officer inauguration gala at the logistics headquarters tomorrow night. They invited wealthy investors, local politicians, and the extended family to celebrate their stolen empire. I looked up at Mr. Caldwell and handed him back the gold pen. I told him I wanted to serve the eviction notice personally. I wanted to walk right into their luxury party and hand them their absolute destruction in front of everyone they were trying to impress. Mr. Caldwell smiled broadly and agreed to accompany me with the county sheriffs. The tension in the room was electric as we placed the signed documents into a fresh folder. The fake queen of Harrison Logistics had exactly 24 hours left to enjoy her stolen crown. The evening of the Grand Chief Executive Officer Inauguration Gala finally arrived. Brittany and Dion had completely transformed the main warehouse floor of Harrison Logistics into an incredibly lavish ballroom. They hired the most expensive event planners in Austin. Crystal chandeliers were temporarily hung from the steel rafters, and the rough concrete floor was covered in plush white carpeting. Professional waiters in crisp, black tuxedos walked through the crowd carrying silver trays loaded with imported caviar and expensive vintage champagne. They had invited over 300 guests to witness their official coronation. The room was packed with wealthy local politicians, greedy corporate investors, and every single member of our extended family. It was a massive, sickening display of stolen wealth. While I was sitting in Mr. Caldwell's quiet office calculating their $5 million eviction debt, they were busy spending thousands of dollars of company money to buy the admiration of complete strangers. Outside the building, the commercial delivery trucks were parked in the dark collecting dust, while the new owners threw a massive party right on the loading dock. My mother Patricia was holding court near the massive ice sculpture in the center of the room. She was wearing a sparkling sequin gown and loudly boasting to anyone who would listen about how her brilliant daughter and highly educated son-in-law were going to revolutionize the state transportation industry. She pointed at the expensive decorations, claiming this was proof of their incredible business genius. At exactly 8 o'clock, a loud, elegant chime echoed through the sophisticated sound system, commanding the attention of the massive crowd. The lights dimmed slightly, highlighting the brightly lit stage erected at the front of the room. Dion stepped up to the microphone. He was wearing an immaculate white custom dinner jacket and holding a crystal flute of champagne. Brittany stood right beside him, wearing a custom-fitted red designer gown that sparkled under the bright stage lights. They looked like absolute American royalty, completely oblivious to the massive financial guillotine hanging right over their heads. Dion tapped his microphone and offered a smooth, highly practiced smile to the silent audience. "Thank you all for coming tonight." Dion projected his deep voice echoing across the massive room. "Tonight, we are not just celebrating a simple transition of power, we are celebrating the dawn of a massive new corporate dynasty. When my brilliant wife and I took over Harrison Logistics, we knew we had to immediately trim the dead weight from the corporate roster. We had to remove the small-minded individuals who lacked our incredible vision and focus solely on explosive global expansion. We are bringing a fresh, modern strategy to an outdated industry." The crowd erupted into polite, wealthy applause. My mother clapped the loudest, wiping away a single tear of pride. Brittany leaned into the microphone, her perfectly painted lips curling into a smug, arrogant smile. "Success is not handed to you," Brittany said, her voice dripping with fake humility. "You have to earn it with sheer talent. You have to be willing to make the absolute hard choices and leave behind anyone who holds you back, even if they share your last name and live in a dusty farmhouse. We are standing here tonight because we are winners. We are the future of this incredibly valuable empire, and we will not let anyone drag us down." Right as the crowd raised their crystal glasses to toast the new corporate rulers, a loud, heavy thud echoed from the back of the massive room. The heavy industrial steel doors of the main warehouse swung open with a violent metallic crash. The sudden loud noise caused the elegant string quartet playing in the corner to immediately stop playing. Hundreds of heads turned toward the back of the room in total unison. I walked slowly through the open doors, stepping onto the plush white carpet. I was not wearing a designer gown or sparkling jewelry. I was wearing a sharp-tailored dark gray business suit. My posture was perfectly straight, and my expression was absolute solid ice. Walking immediately to my right was Mister Caldwell, holding a thick leather portfolio containing their complete destruction. But it was the two men walking directly behind us that caused the entire room to fall into a dead, terrified silence. Two massive uniformed county sheriffs, complete with tactical vests and heavy utility belts, matched my every step. We walked straight down the center aisle, cutting through the sea of wealthy politicians and confused family members. The massive crowd parted for us, instantly stepping back in fear. I could hear the sharp gasps of my aunts and uncles as they recognized me. I saw my mother Patricia completely freeze, her champagne glass stopping halfway to her mouth. Her face turned a sickening shade of pale gray as she stared at the armed law enforcement officers flanking me. I did not look at her. I kept my eyes locked directly on the brightly lit stage. Dion lowered his microphone, his confident smile instantly vanishing. He gripped the wooden podium so hard his knuckles turned white. Brittany took a panicked step backward, her high heel catching on the hem of her expensive red gown. "What is the meaning of this?" Dion demanded, his voice cracking slightly over the loud sound system. "Stella, you are absolutely not invited to this private executive event. I demand that you turn around and leave my corporate headquarters this exact second." Brittany grabbed the microphone from her husband's hand, her face twisting with pure, furious rage. "How dare you show up here and try to ruin the greatest night of my life!" Brittany screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the steel rafters. "You are just a bitter, jealous clerk. Officers, I am the chief executive officer of this company, And I want this woman arrested for criminal trespassing right now. I simply smiled coldly at my sister. The trap was fully set, and it was time I did not stop walking forward. I climbed the 4 carpeted steps leading up to the stage. Dion tried to block my path, but one of the massive county sheriffs placed a heavy hand on his shoulder and moved him aside. Dion stumbled backward, his dinner jacket wrinkling as he bumped into the podium. I reached out and took the microphone directly from his trembling hand. Brittany was hyperventilating beside him, her face twisted into a mask of pure panic. She did not dare make a move with the armed law enforcement officers standing right there. The entire ballroom fell completely silent. 300 wealthy investors, local politicians, and extended family members stared up at me, waiting for an explanation. I did not yell or show any anger. I spoke with a terrifying, absolute calm. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice projecting clearly over the sound system. "My name is Stella. I am a forensic accountant and the sister of your new chief executive officer. I apologize for interrupting this beautiful celebration, but there is critical administrative business that needs to be handled immediately." I nodded to Mr. Caldwell, who plugged a flash drive into the presentation laptop. The massive digital screens behind me that proudly displayed the corporate logo suddenly flickered and changed. A collective murmur rippled through the crowd as a highly detailed legal document appeared on the screens. "That document you are looking at is the official county property deed," I explained calmly. "You will notice my name is listed as the sole legal owner. The bright red boundary lines you see on the map encompass exactly 500 acres of commercial agricultural land. That includes the very ground you are standing on right now. It includes this massive warehouse, the trucking depots, and the main corporate office buildings. My sister Brittany inherited a corporate entity yesterday, but she did not inherit a single inch of the real estate underneath it." Brittany let out a loud, dramatic gasp, covering her mouth. Dion's eyes darted frantically between the massive screen and the crowd. I pressed a button on the remote and the screen changed. "This is the master commercial land lease agreement between my grandfather's estate and Harrison Logistics." I continued, my voice steady. "If you look at the final page, you will see this lease officially expired exactly 1 month ago. The current corporate officers failed to renew it. That means this company is currently occupying my private property illegally. They are holdover tenants committing a massive commercial trespass." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, turning into angry whispers. Several high-profile investors started pulling out their cell phones. I turned my attention directly to the wealthy business partners. "For those of you who recently invested capital into this logistics empire, I highly suggest you call your financial teams right now," I advised. "During my independent audit, I discovered Harrison Logistics is completely insolvent. They are currently drowning in exactly $20 million of toxic debt, unpaid federal tax liens, and predatory fleet leases. Their corporate credit rating was officially downgraded to junk status yesterday morning." The ballroom erupted. People shouted questions, demanding answers. I raised my hand, calling for silence, and the room quieted just enough for me to deliver the final blow. The new chief executive officer and her strategy executive husband spent the last 48 hours draining the absolute last drops of corporate liquidity, I announced, pointing at Dion and Brittany. "They used your investment funds to buy an imported sports car, a luxury yacht party, and this ridiculous gala. Because they illegally misused corporate funds, their corporate veil is pierced. They are personally liable for this massive financial disaster." I clicked the remote one last time. The screen flashed to display the legal documents Mr. Caldwell and I had drafted. "This is a formal commercial eviction notice," I stated loudly over the chaos. "According to the strict penalty clauses in the expired lease, Harrison Logistics owes me exactly $5 million in retroactive rent and unauthorized holdover penalties. Because the company does not have the liquid cash to pay this debt, I am officially executing a commercial lockout effective this exact second. I own this entire building and the land. I am taking it all back tonight." I turned to the 2 county sheriffs standing behind me. "Officers, please begin clearing my private property," I requested. The sheriffs nodded, turning on their heavy flashlights and sweeping the bright beams across the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, the party is officially over," the lead sheriff announced in a booming authoritative voice. "This is now an active legal eviction zone. Please proceed calmly to the nearest exits and vacate the premises immediately. Anyone remaining inside this building in 10 minutes will be arrested for criminal trespassing." Utter, absolute panic set in. The elegant string quartet grabbed their expensive instruments and literally ran for the back doors. The wealthy local politicians who shook Dion's hand just 10 minutes ago were now pushing each other out of the way to escape the massive public scandal. No one wanted to be caught associating with a bankrupt, fraudulent corporation. I watched as major corporate investors cornered my mother Patricia near the melting ice sculpture, screaming at her and demanding their money back. Patricia cried hysterically, her sparkling sequin gown looking completely ridiculous in the harsh light of reality. Dion collapsed onto his knees on the wooden stage, burying his face in his hands, as the incredible weight of the massive corporate debt and the eviction penalty finally crushed him. Brittany screamed at the top of her lungs, stomping her high heels on the stage and demanding that someone fix this immediately. But there was absolutely no one left in the room to fix her disastrous messes. The golden child had finally hit a massive brick wall that she could not manipulate her way out of. I stood quietly on my stage, holding the heavy microphone, and simply watched their fake billionaire empire completely burn to the ground. The massive ballroom emptied out in record time. Just a few short minutes ago, the room was packed with 300 cheering guests, but now it was a ghost town of abandoned champagne glasses and overturned chairs. The heavy silence replacing the loud party music was absolutely deafening. I stood on the stage flanked by the county sheriffs and watched the glorious implosion of the fake royal couple. Dion was still on his knees gripping his head. His white dinner jacket was stained with spilled wine. The sheer gravity of what I had just announced was visibly crushing him. He was a man who styled himself as a genius strategy executive, but he had completely failed to perform a financial background check on the woman he married. Because he had eagerly signed his name as the co-chief executive officer and used corporate credit cards to buy luxury sports cars, his legal fate was now sealed. Piercing the corporate veil meant the $20 million business debt and my $5 million eviction penalty were now directly attached to his social security number. Dion stood up from the floor. He did not look at me. He turned his head and locked his eyes on Brittany. The handsome facade he usually wore melted away, revealing the terrified, selfish coward underneath. Brittany reached out her hand toward him, her lower lip trembling violently. "Dion, what are we going to do?" she cried, her voice thin and pathetic. "You have to call your investor friends. You have to tell them to fix this right now." Dion slapped her hand away so hard, the sound echoed off the steel warehouse walls. "Do not touch me!" Dion screamed, his voice cracking with pure venom. "You worthless fraud. You tricked me. You told me you were inheriting a $15 million cash cow. You told me your grandfather left you an untouchable empire. I married you because you promised me endless wealth and absolute power. You never told me the company was completely underwater. You never told me your sister owned the dirt beneath our feet." Brittany recoiled as if she had been struck. Her eyes widened in absolute shock as the man she had proudly flaunted all night turned on her to save his own skin. "I did not know," Brittany screamed back, tears of black mascara streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "How was I supposed to know the lease expired? I am not an accountant. We are husband and wife, Dion. We have to stick together and fight her in court. We are a team." Dion let out a cruel laugh that sounded almost hysterical. A team, he mocked, stepping away from her. "We are absolutely not a team. I am not going down with your sinking ship, Brittany. I am not spending the rest of my life working minimum wage jobs to pay off $25 million in debt because your grandfather outsmarted you. I am calling my lawyer the second I walk out of this building. I am filing for an emergency divorce, and I am telling the judge that you deliberately committed financial fraud to trap me in this marriage. I am done with you and your toxic, psychotic family." My mother Patricia, who was still cowering near the ice sculpture, let out a loud gasp. Dion, you cannot just abandon her, Patricia wailed, stepping forward. She is your pregnant wife. You made a holy vow. Dion ignored my mother. He did not even look back at Brittany, who had collapsed onto the stage sobbing into her hands. Dion jumped down from the stage and began searching the area near the executive presentation table. I watched him with cold, detached amusement. I knew exactly what he was looking for. During my forensic audit of the corporate bank accounts earlier today, I noticed a suspicious cash withdrawal. $10,000 had been pulled from the emergency petty cash reserve just 3 hours before the party started. Dion had undoubtedly planned to use that money to tip the event planners and buy his way into VIP sections at the after-party. He found it tucked underneath the black tablecloth. It was a black leather briefcase. Dion grabbed the handle, holding it tightly against his chest like a life preserver. He looked around the empty ballroom, his eyes darting toward the main glass doors. But the front lobby was filled with angry investors demanding their money back from the event coordinators. Dion was a coward, and he had no intention of facing the angry mob he had created. He turned his head and looked toward the back of the warehouse, where the heavy loading dock doors led out into the dark industrial parking lot. It was the perfect escape route for a rat fleeing a sinking ship. Without saying another word to his sobbing wife or his hysterical mother-in-law, Dion broke into a full sprint. He ran across the white carpet, his expensive leather shoes slipping slightly as he dodged empty tables and abandoned catering trays. He pushed through the heavy plastic strips hanging over the loading dock exit and disappeared into the humid night. He honestly thought he was getting away. He thought he could just grab the $10,000 of stolen corporate cash, file a quick divorce, and vanish into the shadows, leaving Brittany to take the entire legal fall. He thought he was the smartest person in the room. I stood on the stage holding the microphone and watching the plastic strips swing back and forth in his wake. I did not signal the 2 county sheriffs standing beside me to chase after him. I did not have to. As a forensic accountant, I always build a perfectly secure perimeter before I ever spring a legal trap. Dion was running straight out the back door, but he was not running into freedom. He was running directly into the final phase of my grandfather's brilliant revenge. Dion pushed through the heavy plastic strips hanging over the loading dock doors and burst out into the thick, humid Texas night. He thought he was making a clean getaway. He honestly believed that the massive chaos inside the elegant ballroom would completely cover his cowardly escape. He clutched the black leather briefcase containing the stolen $10,000 of petty cash tightly against his chest, as if it were a life preserver on a sinking ship. I stood on the elevated wooden stage and watched the heavy plastic strips swing wildly back and forth in his wake. Brittany was still sobbing loudly next to the podium, but she stopped crying just long enough to watch her husband absolutely abandon her to face the legal consequences alone. My mother, Patricia, let out a loud, dramatic gasp and covered her mouth with her trembling hands in absolute horror. I simply stood my ground and adjusted the collar of my tailored business suit. I did not yell for the county sheriffs to chase after him. I did not show a single ounce of panic. When you spend your entire professional career auditing high-level financial criminals, you quickly learn that they always try to run when the invisible walls finally close in around them. I had anticipated this exact desperate move from the very beginning. I simply looked at the lead sheriff standing to my right and gave him a very small knowing nod. The lead sheriff did not run. He calmly raised the 2-way radio attached to his tactical vest and spoke clearly into the microphone. He ordered the exterior perimeter units to move in and secure the suspect immediately. Dion did not even make it halfway to his brand new imported sports car. Less than 30 seconds after he disappeared through the loading dock doors, the heavy plastic strips were violently pushed aside again. 2 additional county sheriffs marched back into the brightly lit warehouse under the crystal chandeliers. Between them, they dragged Dion by the collar of his incredibly expensive custom suit. His immaculate white dinner jacket was completely ruined. It was covered in dark grease and wet dirt from the industrial parking lot outside. He was kicking his legs and struggling against their iron grip, shouting at the top of his lungs that they had absolutely no right to detain a highly respected strategy executive. The sheriffs completely ignored his frantic screaming. They pushed him forward, causing him to stumble clumsily over his own expensive leather shoes. He fell hard onto the plush white carpet right at the base of the stage. As he hit the ground, the black leather briefcase popped open. Thick stacks of stolen $100 bills spilled out, spreading across the pristine white carpet like a disgusting stain. The remaining guests, including my mother and the few lingering corporate investors, stared at the scattered money in absolute, shocked silence. Dion scrambled on his hands and knees, panting heavily as he frantically tried to gather the cash back into the briefcase. I took a few slow steps forward until I was standing right at the edge of the stage, looking directly down at him. "Are you leaving so soon, Dion?" I asked, my voice echoing loudly and clearly through the quiet, ruined ballroom. "I thought you were going to call your expensive lawyers and fix this massive misunderstanding." Dion stopped grabbing the money and glared up at me. His handsome face was twisted with pure venomous hatred, and his chest heaved with exhaustion. "You set me up, Stella," he hissed, spitting the words up at me like a cornered snake. "You planted those fake financial ledgers to ruin my life and steal my company." I shook my head slowly, looking at him with nothing but pure professional disgust. "I did not plant a single thing, Dion," I replied smoothly. "But I did find one more incredibly interesting detail during my forensic audit this morning." I turned my head to look directly at Brittany, who was watching her husband crawl on the floor like a desperate, pathetic animal. "I told you both that the logistics company was drowning in $20 million of toxic debt," I continued. "But I did not tell you exactly how Dion managed to pay for that luxury yacht party and the massive down payment on his imported sports car yesterday morning. The corporate credit cards were already maxed out to their absolute limits. The commercial bank accounts were completely frozen after I personally denied your fraudulent $10 million loan application. So Dion had to quickly find a brand new source of liquid cash to fund your fake royal lifestyle and impress all these wealthy politicians." I walked over to the presentation laptop and clicked a button. The massive screens behind me changed to display a highly encrypted banking transfer log. Dion used his brand new administrative access as the CO Chief Executive Officer to completely bypass the internal security protocols of the accounting department. I explained, making sure the law enforcement officers heard every single word. Dion illegally transferred over $150,000 directly out of the employee pension fund. He set up a fake vendor shell account and wired the money to himself. He stole the hard-earned retirement savings of the truck drivers, the mechanics, and the warehouse workers who actually built this empire. He stole from the elderly and the working class just so he could buy expensive champagne and pretend to be a billionaire for a single night. A collective gasp of pure revulsion echoed through the ballroom. Even the greedy investors looked completely sickened. Stealing from a federally protected employee pension fund is not just a minor accounting error. It is a massive federal felony. It carries a mandatory federal prison sentence. The lead sheriff immediately stepped forward and grabbed Dion's arms, pulling him roughly up from the floor. He twisted Dion's arms sharply behind his back. The loud metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs echoed sharply through the silent room, sealing his fate forever. Dion began to scream wildly, crying real tears and begging for his mother-in-law to help him. "Patricia, please help me." Dion sobbed, his arrogant facade completely shattered. "Tell them I am a good man. Tell them Brittany told me to do it." But Patricia took a massive step backward, shaking her head in complete terror and disgust. She refused to even look him in the eyes. She finally realized that the man she had constantly praised as a brilliant business genius was nothing but a common criminal. Brittany let out a harrowing, agonizing scream that pierced the air. Her legs completely gave out beneath her. She collapsed onto the hard wooden stage, her beautiful red designer gown pooling around her like spilled blood. She curled into a tight ball, crying uncontrollably, as she watched her husband being dragged away in handcuffs by the armed sheriffs. She had lost her massive fake company, her husband, and her entire social standing all at once. I watched the aunts and uncles who had mocked me my entire life, quietly backing away toward the exits, too ashamed to even make eye contact with me. They had cheered for the golden child and laughed at the family scapegoat. Now they were witnessing the brutal reality of their own toxic choices. I did not feel an ounce of pity for any of them. The absolute destruction of their false reality was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. The room that was designed to celebrate their limitless power had officially become their permanent financial graveyard. I stood perfectly still and looked up at the digital clock mounted on the far warehouse wall. It had been exactly 19 minutes since I walked through the main doors with the eviction notice. In less than 20 minutes, their entire arrogant empire was completely reduced to absolute ashes. Exactly 1 month passed since the spectacular collapse of Harrison Logistics. The brutal Texas summer heat began to give way to the cooler winds of early autumn, bringing a sense of profound change to Austin. The fallout from the grand inauguration party was absolute and completely unforgiving. The logistics company that my grandfather built and my sister destroyed in less than 48 hours was officially liquidated by the federal bankruptcy courts. The massive warehouse was completely emptied out. The delivery trucks were seized by predatory leasing agencies, and the remaining assets were sold off for pennies on the dollar to satisfy a tiny fraction of the $20 million debt. The fake empire they had paraded around the city was completely erased from the map forever. Dion was currently sitting in a federal holding facility entirely stripped of his custom-tailored Italian suits and luxury watches. He was formally indicted on multiple felony charges for the illegal embezzlement of the employee pension funds. Because he was considered an extreme flight risk, the federal judge firmly denied his request for bail. Brittany was left completely alone to face the massive financial wreckage. The high society friends she desperately tried to buy instantly abandoned her. She was forced to file for total personal bankruptcy. All of her designer clothes, her expensive jewelry, and her luxury vehicles were immediately seized by angry creditors. But the absolute worst destruction did not stop with my sister and her husband. My mother, Patricia, had spent her entire adult life worshipping the illusion of wealth and social status. She had always prioritized appearances over genuine love, and she enabled my sister's worst behaviors for 30 years. Her absolute blind devotion to her golden child ultimately proved to be her complete undoing. During the brief window when Brittany and Dion thought they were untouchable billionaires, Patricia had eagerly co-signed several massive personal loans for them. She put up her beautiful affluent suburban house, the same house where I grew up, as the invisible scapegoat, as the primary collateral for those high-interest loans. When the corporate veil was pierced, and Brittany defaulted on everything, the commercial banks did not hesitate. They aggressively executed the foreclosure on my mother's perfect home. Patricia lost absolutely everything. She lost her country club membership and her extended family, who now completely ignored all of her frantic phone calls. She was left with absolutely nothing but a cheap rental car and a few suitcases filled with whatever clothes she could pack before the bank officially changed the locks on her front door. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when my security cameras alerted me to a vehicle approaching the boundary of my 500-acre property. I was sitting at my grandfather's mahogany desk in the basement, reviewing a lucrative commercial rezoning proposal, when the notification popped up on my computer monitor. I switched the screen to the live camera feed. A dusty, compact rental car was parked awkwardly on the gravel driveway, right outside the brand-new heavy iron security gates I had recently installed. A woman stepped out of the car. It was Patricia. She looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant woman who had worn a sparkling sequin gown and drank expensive champagne at the warehouse party. She looked incredibly old, tired, and completely broken. I walked up the wooden stairs, leaving the cool basement behind, and stepped out onto the front porch. The farmhouse was already looking entirely different. I walked slowly down the gravel driveway, my footsteps crunching softly in the quiet afternoon air, until I stood just a few feet away from the heavy iron gates. Patricia gripped the black metal bars with both of her hands, pressing her face against the cold iron. "Stella," she cried out, her voice cracking with raw, desperate emotion. "Oh, Stella, thank God you are here. Please, you have to open the gate and let me inside. I have nowhere else to go. The bank took the house this morning. They took absolutely everything. Brittany is living in a cheap motel, and she will not even answer my calls anymore. You are my daughter, Stella. You are the only family I have left in this entire world." I stood perfectly still with my hands resting casually in the pockets of my jeans. I looked at the woman who had spent 33 years making me feel completely worthless. I remembered how she stood in the lobby of my elite accounting firm and tried to destroy my professional career by screaming fake accusations at my senior partners. She had never once protected me. She had only ever used me as a convenient stepping stone for her favorite child. "I am very sorry for your current financial situation, Patricia," I said, my voice completely calm and devoid of any anger. "But this is private property, and you are not welcome here." Patricia began to sob uncontrollably, tears streaming down her pale face. "How can you be so incredibly cruel?" "Stella," she wailed, her fingers gripping the iron bars tighter. "I am your mother. I gave you life. You have 500 acres of land and a massive house. You have millions of dollars. You can easily afford to help me. You can easily afford to pay off the bank and get my house back. We are family, Stella. You have to forgive me because blood is thicker than water." I looked directly into her desperate, crying eyes and felt absolutely nothing. The deep emotional wound she had inflicted on me during my childhood was completely healed. I simply did not care about her at all. "Blood might be thicker than water, Patricia," I replied, my tone completely even and absolute. "But the well is dry, Mother. You and Brittany spent 33 years aggressively pumping every single drop of love, patience, and financial support out of me. You drained it completely empty to water your own selfish delusions. There is absolutely nothing left for you to take from me. The family bank is permanently closed, and my emotional debt to you is officially paid in full." Patricia opened her mouth to scream another desperate apology, but I did not stay to listen. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small electronic remote control for the security system. I pressed the heavy red button. The massive iron gates let out a loud mechanical hum, ensuring the electronic deadbolts were firmly locked in place. I turned my back on her and began walking slowly up the long gravel driveway toward my beautiful restored home. I could hear her screaming my name, begging me to come back, but the sound simply faded away into the soft autumn wind. I did not turn around a single time. I walked up the steps of the front porch, opened my solid oak front door, and stepped inside my peaceful sanctuary. I locked the door behind me, finally closing the darkest chapter of my life forever. The enabler had fallen, the golden child was ruined, and the scapegoat had inherited the entire world. 6 months have passed since the night the heavy industrial doors of Harrison Logistics were locked for the very last time. The bitter winter eventually faded away, and the warm Texas spring brought an incredible sense of renewal to my life. Once the massive bankruptcy courts officially finished liquidating the ruined corporate empire, there was absolutely nothing left on my property but empty steel warehouses and cracked asphalt parking lots. But as a forensic accountant, I have always known that true value is rarely found in what currently exists. True value is always found in what you can build on a clean foundation. I hired a massive demolition crew to tear down the physical reminders of my grandfather's company. I watched the heavy machinery crush the corporate headquarters into dust, completely erasing the toxic legacy that my sister and my mother valued more than they ever valued me. Once the 500 acres of land were completely cleared, I went straight to work on the most ambitious financial project of my entire career. I did not want to be a commercial agricultural landlord. I saw the rapid expansion of the technology sector in Austin, and I knew my property was situated in the absolute perfect geographic location. I hired a team of top-tier real estate attorneys and urban developers to completely rezone the massive property. We successfully transitioned the zoning permits from agricultural to heavy commercial technology use. It took several months of incredibly hard work, endless city council meetings, and massive piles of bureaucratic paperwork. But my deep forensic accounting background and my refusal to back down eventually paid off in the most spectacular way imaginable. Just last week, I sat at the head of a polished mahogany table in a high-rise corporate boardroom. I was not sitting across from a desperate brother-in-law begging for a fraudulent loan. I was sitting across from the executive board of one of the largest global tech conglomerates in the world. They had been desperately searching for a massive piece of secure land near the city to build their brand new flagship data center. My 500 acres were exactly what they needed. We negotiated for less than 2 hours before they met my final asking price. I signed the transfer deeds and handed over the property rights. Within 24 hours, my bank account received a direct wire transfer for exactly $30 million. It was a staggering amount of money. It was wealth that Brittany and Patricia had desperately tried to fake, but it was wealth that I had actually earned through intelligence, patience, and unbreakable boundaries. Today, I am standing on the massive glass balcony of my brand new luxury penthouse apartment, located right in the vibrant heart of downtown Austin. The sun is setting over the beautiful city skyline, casting a warm golden glow across the modern skyscrapers. The air up here is incredibly clean and peaceful. I lean against the sleek metal railing and look down at the busy city streets far below me. I cannot help but think about the tiny, cramped apartment I used to share with my family. I remember the absolute humiliation of walking out of the elevator and finding all of my personal belongings thrown carelessly into the public hallway in trash bags. Dion had arrogantly claimed my bedroom for his fake sneaker closet because he thought he was a billionaire chief executive officer. He had laughed at me and told me to go count weeds on a dirt farm. Now Dion is sitting in a federal prison cell, wearing a standard-issue jumpsuit, and waiting for his trial for embezzling employee pension funds. Brittany is living in a tiny rented room working double shifts at a local diner just to pay off the massive legal fees from her bankruptcy and her extremely messy divorce. My mother Patricia is still trying to live with her various distant relatives, completely cut off from the high society country club life she sacrificed her own daughter to maintain. They threw me out into the hallway to build an empire of lies, and now they have absolutely nothing. I take a slow, deep breath of the warm evening air and feel a profound sense of absolute freedom. For 33 years, I believed that being a good person meant I had to constantly absorb their endless abuse. I thought that because we shared the same last name, I was obligated to act as their emotional punching bag and their financial safety net. I thought that family loyalty meant setting myself on fire just to keep them warm. But the incredible events of the past 6 months have fundamentally rewritten my entire understanding of love and loyalty. I have learned that the absolute greatest revenge you can ever take against toxic, manipulative people is not destroying them. The greatest revenge is stepping entirely out of their chaotic arena and building a life of massive, undeniable success. It is finding your own deep inner peace and making yourself completely, legally, and financially untouchable. They wanted me to stay small so they could feel big. By refusing to play their toxic games, I did not just defeat them, I completely outgrew them. I am now a senior partner at my elite accounting firm, managing massive global portfolios and living a life of absolute luxury that they can only dream about. I am completely surrounded by supportive colleagues, genuine friends, and a beautiful chosen family who respect my boundaries and value my brilliant mind. The deep emotional wounds that my mother and my sister inflicted on me when I was a child are finally fully healed. I no longer feel the heavy, agonizing burden of being the family scapegoat. I am just Stella. I am a strong, wealthy, independent woman who owns her own story completely. I do not carry any hatred in my heart for them anymore, because hatred requires energy, and I refuse to give them another single drop of my precious energy. They are simply ghosts from a past life that I have firmly locked away behind heavy iron gates. My grandfather's final gift was not just a piece of valuable commercial real estate. His true gift was forcing me to finally stand up for myself and realize my own incredible worth. He handed me the tools to orchestrate my own liberation, and I will spend the rest of my life honoring his brilliant legacy by refusing to ever settle for anything less than absolute respect. Family isn't blood, it's who respects you. Have you ever cut off toxic relatives and leveled up? Tell me your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe.